All right, let's wrap up the AFC and NFC East show with the New England Patriots coming off another disappointing season, picking at number 3 overall. But they have the quarterback, right? They have picking at 4 overall. They have Drake Maye, right? So you have that at least solved. Now you just have to fix the offensive line, every pass catcher, the defensive line, the defense as a whole. A lot to do in New England, but at least Drake Maye is in town.
At least Drake May's there. Nothing else is, but Drake Maye is. So, yeah, the good news is they got a ton of cap space to spend. Like they're the team with the war chest to go nuts. And okay, the last time they went crazy in free agents with spending, it didn't work that well. But we got to do it. We got to deploy the war chest and go buy some players.
The first time, and remember my funny joke. Well, that was the first year Nick Caserio had left. I was like, oh, Nick Caserio's been holding Belichick down because Bill went nuts. It was his first year that he really went crazy in free agency. He started paying, what did he pay for? Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, Jalen Mills.
Even just that, right? He made 2 different tight ends, the highest paid tight end in the NFL in the same offseason.
Kendrick Bourne, Nelson Aguilar. I'm trying to remember all the names. And Hunter Henry's still around. Like some of them were pretty good, but it was a lot of overpaying for mid-tier free agents. And look, New England might be in that spot now, right? I mean, this isn't this. It used to be the spot where Tom Brady was there, and it's like, oh, people are going to take this discount to go win a ring. Now it's like, who wants to go to New England right now? Maybe Drake Maye will be more attractive for potential free agents, but they probably have to overpay. So in my strategy here, I think the O-line needs to be addressed first. And you talked about their cap space. Every team is looking at, well, Trey Smith is the top guard on the market, and he's going to be making over $20 million a year. Like the Patriots have the money to just overpay for Trey Smith and just start with that in the O-line overhaul at least.
Yeah, the only downside of that is the one player in that offensive line you would say probably doesn't need to be replaced is Michael Onwenu, and that's where they want to play him.
Good point.
Now, Onwenu can play right tackle. Like maybe you just solve it and say, okay, we think you're best at right guard. We also know you can play right tackle, so that's where you're playing because we just paid Trey Smith.
Would have done that a year ago anyway had Onwenu play right tackle. But my second point, though, is that the Patriots should sign Morgan Moses. So maybe it doesn't all work out exactly as you said, but they could sign Morgan Moses. Maybe just keep Onwenu, sign Morgan Moses. Now you have a right tackle. You have a starting right tackle. Get the Morgan Moses ticker going. He's one of those spots. At least solve right tackle there for a year while you're fixing all the other stuff.
The Trey Smith thing is interesting because I agree with you. That's obviously that's the most obvious place where they should go with that money. The current thinking is that the Chiefs may apply the transition tag to Trey Smith, which is cheaper than the exclusive rights franchise tag. Effectively, the only difference between the two is number one, it's cheaper, but number two, other teams can negotiate if you are on the transition tag as opposed to the exclusive rights franchise tag, right? So the Chiefs, if they apply that to him, New England can still come in with an offer that Kansas City basically can't match because they have $100 million in cap space and Kansas City does not. So if the Patriots want Trey Smith, unless the Kansas City Chiefs put the exclusive rights franchise tag on him, which feels unlikely, they can basically get him, you know?
You are right, though. It's like right guard might be the one spot where they might not want to slide someone in. And Onwenu could play left guard. He could do a lot of different things. New England's also in this weird spot where maybe Cole Strange could still be decent.
Yeah.
And we don't know what's happened with David Andrews at center and him coming back. Like they're probably not as bad as they were last year because a few guys got hurt and all their backups were they were practice squad guys that they were bringing in. It was awful. But part of that issue was the lack of depth that they built. So it might not be as bad on paper, but it's still one of those, like, if you don't bring in 3 or 4 new players on the O-line, it's going to feel like a loss of an offseason, I think, for the Patriots.
That's the thing. So I think like the obvious place to throw the money is Trey Smith. If you don't throw it at Trey Smith, I think you also could potentially throw it at Ronnie Stanley, left tackle, lock up that spot. I think they should be in the market for all those like serviceable offensive linemen, though, that we talked about as well. Like allocate big money to one guy to come in and like be your Joe Tooney, right? The guy that you've made one of the best paid players at his position to fix a spot, but then also like throw several more rounds at lower level free agents that can come in and do a job as well, and get a couple of those guys in the building. Because, like, this again, if they don't get Ronnie Stanley, maybe they're in the Alaric Jackson world. I mean, maybe that line is bad enough that even a Dan Moore Jr. is a potential upgrade at left tackle. Like, just try and raise the floor of this group as much as you can.
As long as you don't have to play the Browns, Dan Moore, serviceable
or
left
Ken
tackle.
Robinson. Robinson saved Minnesota's season by being a serviceable left tackle.
I think I'm of the mind here. I've been asked a lot about what New England should do at 4, and I think I'm landing on this one, Sam. I'm going to pay Ronnie Stanley at left tackle. Let's forget Trey Smith here. You're right. Within when he talked me out of it. I'm going to spend the money on Ronnie Stanley at left tackle because of the questions for Will Campbell and Kelvin Banks and some of those tackles in this draft. Then you're sitting here at 4, and I'm going to put Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, and Mason Graham all in the same bucket, right? Mason Graham at defensive tackle, absolute game wrecker when you watch him. I'm okay with any of those 3 players. So I think if New England signs Ronnie Stanley, take the tackle need out of it now, draft the best player available at 4, whether it's Carter, Hunter, or Graham. They might all get that blue chip status, the coveted blue chip status for non-quarterbacks. They might be the only 3 in this draft. Take the best one remaining of those 3. You don't have to worry about Will Campbell's arms or any of that stuff. I'm going to say that's the way to go. Ronnie Stanley plus the best player of Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, Mason Graham at 4.
Yeah, I mean, Stanley fixes left tackle. I mean, you can make a case if you're in the world of like thinking Will Campbell's a guard, you could all of a sudden you draft him at guard. Okay, it's very high for a guard, but
not at 4 though.
Yeah, it's very high, but like if it depends how good you think he is, right? Like Quentin Nelson went at 6 as one of the best guards you're ever going to see as a prospect. Like, it's doable, and the point is your offensive line is that bad. But all of a sudden, at that point, you could have like Ronnie Stanley at left guard, Campbell at left tackle, Campbell at left guard, David Andrews is fine at center, Mike Owenu at right guard, and then you just need a right tackle from somewhere, which we can platoon a few players of that, or you add another mid-tier free agent or so as your left guard. You find one of those guys. And then to me, wide receiver 1 in this draft class might be Travis Hunter. Like, we're going to talk endlessly about, is he a 2-way player? How do you play him? Do you play him at corner and get it's sort of about maximizing what he can do. If you don't care about that though, and you're just evaluating effectively 2 separate players, right? Travis Hunter, the wide receiver prospect, and Travis Hunter, the cornerback prospect. I think Travis Hunter, the wide receiver prospect, is wide receiver 1 in this draft, at which point take him at number 4 and you have your number 1 wide receiver.
In the other part that we keep mentioning about Travis Hunter is for certain teams, or at least the depth that he brings as a guy that can move from corner to receiver. On certain teams, he's more valuable as a receiver. For New England, who has a massive need at receiver,
right,
but does have Christian Gonzalez at corner, right? You might have more of a need at receiver, and Travis Hunter is more receiver than corner for the Patriots, and you almost reverse it. It's harder to do full-time receiver and like, oh, here's a package at corner, but you can do it. Like, it is doable, and you're a backup or whatever. But for New England, he might be a receiver first, and the weapon that we're talking about that Drake Maye needs to, kickstart his career.
And look, I think we're going to be so focused on like the way of maximizing what he can do as this theoretical 2-way player, or, a guy that could play both sides of the ball. But if you just don't think that that's viable at the next level, if you're just like, I don't care, like, it's cool, it's an amazing story, but for us, this guy is just wide receiver 1 in this draft, right? We are just looking at the best wide receiver prospect available to us. And by the way, a guy who almost certainly, the second you ask him to stop playing both ways, becomes measurably better at whichever side of the ball you're putting him at, right? Whether you view him as a wide receiver or a corner, the chances are we are not seeing the optimal version of Travis Hunter yet, because he's playing the other side of the ball as well. And as much as I think he got better at this and it became less of a problem, even last year, I think you can still see a lot of reps where he just looks tired, understandably so, right? Take all those off the table and you get a better player at either spot, wide receiver or corner. So I think the Patriots have a very strong argument to say this guy is a more dynamic, more explosive, more well-rounded threat than, McMillan, say, and he's the top wide receiver in the draft. We're just taking him at 4.
I think the bottom line for the Patriots is if they don't make multiple moves in free agency on the offensive line, it might take those things off the table. It could force their hand. Like if they go in with a massive tackle need, then maybe at 4 you trade down and you say, hey, I could take Kelvin Banks at 12 or something. Trade down from 4 if you find a trade partner, because you still have enough needs to fill. But I would hate to go into the draft and not feel good about taking Travis Hunter or Mason Graham or Abdul Carter, whoever's available there, just because I haven't filled my offensive line issues.
And that would be crazy to do given the money that they have to spend, right? Given the resources that they have to try and fix that in a way. Other teams, like there are some teams that are in a position where even if they needed or wanted to overhaul the offensive line with 4 or 5 players before the draft, they just don't have the money to make it happen. The Patriots have the money to make it happen. So like not doing that when there are players available that would make sense would be crazy. It would be negligent. The other area, by the way, that the Patriots could get into, maybe they can throw an offer to the Bengals for Tee Higgins that the Bengals can't or won't turn down. Again, that's the thing that money lets you do, right? That's the flexibility that you have with $100 million war chest. You can say, well, what if we, package a draft pick and whatever else to the Bengals and we pay this guy? Like Tee Higgins suddenly becomes the wide receiver answer. And then you can, again, continue to work on the offensive line elsewhere.
Plus, the Patriots have 9 picks.
Yeah.
It's 4 in the top 77, 5 in the top 104. So they do have that extra flexibility. That's the other interesting thing about 4, right? If they did go make a move for Higgins, give up some picks, they wouldn't give up 4. You could still take 4, trade down, accumulate, pick up the picks that you just traded, essentially, or you grab potentially elite player at 4, elite player in Higgins, and just adding 2 elite players with Drake Maye at quarterback. I mean, all of a sudden this roster is looking much better just off the back of 2 moves.
I mean, if they have been able to throw a decent chunk of money at Ronnie Stanley, bring in a couple of more mid-level offensive linemen that could start, either definitely be penciled in to start or could start in a competition, you throw a chunk of your cap money and a couple of draft picks to Cincinnati for Tee Higgins, and then you can still come out of the draft with maybe the best defensive player in the draft, whether it's Abdul Carter or Mason Graham, or even you get Travis Hunter, and actually now that you don't need him to be wide receiver 1, maybe now he can be both wide receiver and cornerback 3. Like maybe he can become a 2-way player for you now that you don't need him to be number 1 wide receiver. Like actually now you can entertain the idea that he can be a 2-way player.
The other thing I think they should explore, I'll bring up Cooper Kupp again. I just think the fit with May would be really good. You have to go evaluate, what does Cooper Kupp have left? I wouldn't want to give up a ton for him, but in this idea that where you need multiple receivers, you need multiple offensive and defensive linemen, you need multiple everything. Is Cooper Kupp one of those potential options? I think that's at least on the table. And then I like the second wave of receivers. So again, depending on how things go early, Jaden Higgins from Iowa State, Jack Besh from TCU. Love both of those guys as potential options here. I think they have to at least dip into the deep running back group here and grab one of those guys with one of those 9 draft picks. And then you mentioned Malcolm Kuntz, maybe for the Jets. Tough to solve all these problems. I think the second tier group of defensive linemen, Malcolm Kuntz, BJ Hill, those types of players, I think should be on the table, right? So you get second wave of free agents there while you're filling all these other names, big needs across the rest of the roster.
None of it worked year 1 for them last year, but I actually liked the strategy of what they did in the draft, which is, look, we didn't trade down, we took our quarterback, and now we're basically like the rest of the draft is just going to be multiple picks at offensive line and receiver, right? And in receiver in particular, they ended up with Jalen Polk, Javon Baker. Neither one of those guys did anything year 1. In fact, Polk was a disaster year 1. Is like the bottom left quadrant of a bunch of those, statistical charts that sort of track various different things. Like he's always off on his own and like the least efficient receiver in the league, essentially. So, but I like the strategy. Like, let's just take a couple of swings and hope that one of them works out. And so far, neither of them did. But I wouldn't stop that, or I wouldn't let that stop me from basically repeating it, doing it all over again, draft 2 more receivers and hope that one of the 4 that we drafted in the last 2 years does something in training camp.
I do wonder how much the Mike Vrabel factor, how much he's talking about running the ball and what winning teams do. I do wonder how much of that, plays into the strategy here. And if they do focus on the perimeter players, much like when Jim Harbaugh took over with the Chargers, they had 0 players on their wide receiver depth chart, and they went tackle first. They did receiver in volume later, but it was O-line first. And I do believe that's this offseason for New England. O-line first, and then figure out the pass catchers later, which could be doubling up, tripling up in the draft once again to try to find somebody. Cool, man. They fixed?
Yeah, pretty much. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of our video.
For more great content, click here to subscribe and here to watch another video. We'll see you again soon.